There's a gap between who you are and who you know you could be. You feel it every time you promise yourself you'll change. Every time you say, "This is the week I get my life together. This is the month I finally commit." Or this is the year things finally become different. And for a while, you believe it. You make the plans, you set goals, you imagine the person you're about to become. Someone unshakable, disciplined, true to yourself. Someone who follows through. Someone you can actually be proud of. But somehow you always end up right back where you started. Not because you don't care, not because you're lazy, and not because you don't know what to do. Actually, that's what makes this so frustrating. You already know the habits you need to build, the boundaries you need to set, the opportunities you're avoiding, the conversations you need to have. Deep down, you already know the life you want. So, why does it feel like there's an invisible wall blocking you from making progress? See, most people think they suffer when they procrastinate, when they distract themselves from what's important, or when they indulge in bad habits. But all that is surface level pain. The deeper wound is what happens afterward. Because every time you break a promise to yourself, something small shifts. You trust yourself a little less. Every time you say, "I'll start tomorrow," and tomorrow becomes next week, a tiny crack forms in your self trust. After enough years, the problem stops feeling like "I need better habits" and starts feeling like "what the hell is wrong with me? Why can't I do what I know I should do?" You begin carrying around this quiet feeling that you're capable of so much more, but for some reason, you can't fully access it. Now, hopefully, you're ready to write some things down, because by the end of this video, you'll learn a shadow work method that will help you break through the boundaries keeping you small, end self sabotage for good, and rewrite the hidden programming shaping your entire life. Because once you can see the code running your character, you gain the ability to change it. But before we can do that, we need to investigate something first. Because the person you think you are might not actually be who you are. It might just be the character you've learned to play. Before we talk about shadow work, we need to talk about something most people never notice. You're playing a character, not in a fake or manipulative way, in the same way everyone does. You might not even realize you're doing it, because the character has been there for so long that it feels like you. Sometimes it even responds before you do. This matters because most of the behaviors we call personality are actually strategies, ways of navigating the world, ways of staying safe, ways of protecting ourselves. Maybe everyone relies on you. Everyone comes to you with their problems, and one day someone asks, "Are you okay?" And without even thinking, you say, "Yeah, I'm fine." Obviously, not because it's true, but because somewhere along the way, needing help stopped feeling safe. Maybe someone asks you for a favor. Your schedule is already full and you're exhausted. You want to say no, yet somehow you hear yourself saying, "Sure." Then later you're frustrated with yourself, not because you wanted to help, but because you abandon yourself to avoid disappointing someone else. Again. Or maybe you're the quiet one. You have something to say, an opinion, a joke, a question. Whatever it is, you keep it to yourself, because drawing attention to yourself feels dangerous. Then years pass, and eventually you start saying, "Oh, I'm just an introvert." Maybe. Or maybe you learn that staying invisible felt safer than being seen. This is where things start getting interesting. Because once you begin looking at your behavior this way, it begs the question, how much of your personality was actually chosen? How much of it was built? How much of it developed because it helped you navigate your environment? Because that's what a character actually is, a collection of beliefs, strategies, habits, roles, and stories. Eventually, this mask stops being something you wear and becomes who you believe you are. And the most obvious characters aren't the ones you consciously choose to play, they're the ones you've forgotten you're playing. Most people think they're consciously living their lives, but mostly they're just acting out a script. A script that's been ran so often, it overwrote reality. It feels like personality, like identity, The mask simply became invisible. And once that happens, you stop questioning it. You stop asking where the mask came from. You stop asking whether it still serves you, and you stop asking whether it's actually you. You simply become it. That's why so many people feel stuck. Not because they can't change, but because they're trying to change behavior without understanding the character they're playing. They're fighting symptoms while the script keeps running underneath. And if you never examine the script, you'll keep looping the same harmful patterns. Of course, none of this is your fault. You were just following programming you didn't realize was there. But this leads us to the next question. If you're playing a character, who wrote the script? If the character you're playing wasn't consciously chosen, then where did it come from? Most people assume they simply became who they are. But the deeper you look, the less that explanation makes sense. Because none of us arrive in the world believing we're not enough. You weren't born ashamed of making mistakes. You weren't born afraid of rejection. You weren't born believing your needs were a burden. Those ideas came from somewhere. The human mind is an adaptation machine. From the moment you're born, it's constantly trying to answer one question. What do I need to do to be safe here? Not just physically safe, but emotionally safe, accepted, included, loved. And because your brain is trying to solve that problem, it's paying attention to everything. Who gets praised, who gets ignored, what creates connection, what creates pain. Slowly, you begin creating rules, invisible rules about who it's safe to be. A child runs into a room excited to share something, but nobody really listens. Nobody asks questions. Nobody seems interested. And years later, people describe this person as private. But maybe they weren't born private. Maybe they learned that opening up felt disappointing. A kid gets laughed at after saying the wrong thing. Not a life-changing moment, just one embarrassing experience. But they remember it. And now they rehearse conversations before speaking. Double check every message, stay quiet in groups. The curious child became reserved because some part of them learned being wrong is dangerous. Or maybe achievement got attention, good grades got praise, being useful got approval, and without realizing it, you start connecting your worth to performance. Now every goal feels personal, every mistake feels like evidence, every failure feels like a verdict on who you are as a person. What most people never realize is that most of the behaviors you hate about yourself were solutions. At least once. The people pleaser solved conflict. The perfectionist solved criticism. The lone wolf solved disappointment. The overthinker solved uncertainty. The adaptation worked. That's why it survived. Imagine injuring your leg and learning to walk with a limp. At first, the limp protects you by helping you avoid pain. But if the injury heals and 20 years later you're still limping, the pattern became automatic. That's what happens psychologically. The environment changes, but the adaptation remains. Still protecting, still reacting, still solving problems that may no longer exist. And underneath many of those adaptations is something people often call the inner child. This is just the part of you that still carries old emotional experiences, the part that remembers. Imagine someone gives you mild criticism, a comment most people can brush off and move on with their day. But for you, it echoes in your mind the rest of the week. Not because the criticism was devastating, but because it bypassed your armor and cut into something older, something deeper you don't have a name for. When your emotional reaction feels bigger than the event itself, that's usually a clue. A hint that you're not just reacting to the present moment, you're feeling old pain through a new situation. Now, you might be wondering, if these patterns began years ago, why are they still controlling you today? And this is where things might get uncomfortable. Because most people eventually notice the character. But even after noticing it, they can't stop. You know you're people pleasing, but you keep doing it. You know you're avoiding things, but you keep putting them off. You know the voice in your head is unfair, but it still cuts you down. Why? Well, because you don't know how else to be. What began as a conscious survival strategy eventually became unconscious. The script kept running, and because it was left in the dark, It started influencing your choices without asking for permission. Your relationships, your confidence, your reactions, your sense of self, all quietly operating in the background. If you've ever wondered why you don't quite feel comfortable in your own skin, it's because there's a hidden part of yourself you've never even met before. That's your shadow. Knowing where a pattern came from doesn't mean you know what's keeping it alive. There's still another layer. And this is where the shadow enters the story. Most people hear the word shadow and imagine something mysterious, dark, something they're supposed to get rid of. But the shadow isn't evil. Your shadow is simply all the parts of yourself you haven't fully accepted, the beliefs you haven't questioned, the fears you haven't examined, the needs you haven't acknowledged. The stories operating beneath your awareness. Think about it. Have you ever met someone who you can tell desperately wants love, yet always pushes people away? Someone who hates being judged, yet constantly judges others? Someone who complains about controlling people, yet tries to control everything around them? Most people can spot contradictions in other people, but the shadow is our inability to spot them in ourselves. And the longer something remains unseen, the more influence it tends to have. Have you ever solved a problem only for it to return 6 months later in a new way? Different relationship, same insecurity. Different job, same fear. Different goal, same self doubt. The circumstances changed, but the emotional experience stayed the same because only the symptom changed. The root stayed hidden. This is called reflection debt. Every painful belief you refuse to examine, every recurring pattern you avoid investigating, every uncomfortable truth you keep buried, the debt accumulates. And the unconscious doesn't disappear when ignored, it simply moves underground. And when something lives in the dark long enough, it starts influencing your life without your awareness. Maybe it becomes anxiety, maybe resentment, maybe perfectionism, maybe a constant feeling that something is wrong, even when life from the outside looks fine. Which is why self awareness matters so much here, because it gives you a choice. Before awareness, you're reacting. After it, you can respond. Before awareness, the pattern is driving, and after awareness, you can finally take the wheel. And this brings us to one of the most important insights. Your suffering is rarely caused by what happens, it's caused by what it means. Imagine two people receiving the exact same criticism. One shrugs and moves on, the other holds on to it for years. Same event, different meaning. One person here's some feedback, and the other hears, you're not good enough. The criticism isn't creating the suffering, the story is. And whether you realize it or not, you're already living inside stories. Stories about who you are, what you're capable of, whether people can be trusted, whether you're lovable, whether you're enough. Some of these stories help you, and some of them cage you. The problem is that most people never realize their stories. They experience them as reality. But once you can see the stories shaping your identity, you get to decide which ones deserve to keep shaping it. You stop being a victim of your programming and become the creator of your own character. Which raises something important. What happens when you start bringing those hidden parts of yourself into the light? What surprises people most about this work is the biggest changes aren't always the ones they expect. Most people think shadow work will help them understand themselves better. It does, but that's usually not the thing that changes their life. Their lives change when they see that the thing that once controlled them has lost its power. Not overnight, but gradually. And not because they stop feeling emotions, but because they finally understand them. Imagine feeling anxious, and instead of immediately trying to escape the feeling, numb it, suppress it, or distract yourself, you become curious. What is this trying to tell me? Where is it coming from? What am I actually afraid of? Most people are dragged around by emotions they don't understand. Shadow work helps you develop a relationship with them instead. And once that starts happening, something else begins to change. you become less reactive. Have you ever noticed how exhausting it is to be constantly defending yourself? Defending your image, your worth, your decisions, your identity. And when someone criticizes you, it ruins your day. When someone disagrees with you, it feels personal. And when someone rejects you, it feels like proof that something is wrong with you. But when you begin understanding your shadow, criticism starts losing its sting. You know who you are because you've finally met yourself. You understand your strengths and weaknesses. You know your drives and desires. And that understanding creates something many people spend their entire lives searching for: self respect. It's easy to confuse self respect with confidence. Confidence often depends on success, right? It comes and goes. Self respect depends on integrity. It's the foundation real progress can be built from. And this is one of the biggest transformations of all. You stop trying to earn your worth. You stop trying to earn the right to exist. You stop trying to earn the right to take up space. And you stop trying to earn the right to be loved. Instead, you begin building a relationship with yourself based on understanding, honesty, and compassion. And when that happens, the war starts ending. You know the one, the constant battle in your own head, the voice telling you you're not enough, the feeling that you're always behind, the pressure to become someone else before you can finally relax, the belief that happiness exists somewhere on the other side of perfection. For a lot of people, shadow work doesn't create some grand moment of enlightenment. It creates peace. And when you stop trying to fix what was never broken, you suddenly have energy available for other things, for relationships, creativity, for goals, for adventure, for life. And that's another thing people don't expect. Their relationships begin changing. Think about how many relationship problems are actually like self-awareness problems. Poor boundaries, fear of vulnerability, fear of abandonment, fear of intimacy. Most of us bring our unconscious patterns into every relationship we have. But when you begin understanding yourself, you begin understanding others differently too. You become less judgmental, more compassionate, more curious. And it's not because you're suddenly untouchable, it's because you realize that everyone is carrying their own wounds. Another thing that will return is authenticity. The feeling of no longer being a stranger to yourself, no longer constantly editing yourself, no longer trying to maintain an exhausting image. Imagine how different life would feel if you weren't constantly trying to protect a character, trying to become enough without realizing that enoughness was never something you were supposed to earn. All that changes when you decide to show up for yourself, maybe for the first time. The parts you've judged, the parts you've hidden, the parts you've been fighting, you're finally starting a conversation with them. Not to become some idealized version of yourself, but to let the real you feel safe enough to come out of hiding. And when it does, your life finally moves in alignment instead of being pulled apart by competing forces. So now that you know this is possible, that your patterns can be understood, that your character can be consciously shaped, how do you actually begin doing the work? Let's return to everything we've uncovered so far. The character you're playing wasn't consciously chosen. Many of its patterns began as adaptations. Those adaptations became automatic, and the parts operating beneath your awareness became the shadow. So, how do you actually work with it? How do you stop repeating the same loops and uncover what's really driving them? All this time, you've been standing at the threshold of a door you never learned how to enter, a doorway into the hidden parts of yourself that have been shaping your life without your awareness. The fears beneath your fears, the beliefs beneath your beliefs, the stories beneath your reactions. Every insecurity, every resentment, every overreaction, every self sabotaging impulse is a clue, a map marker pointing towards something deeper. Most people spend their lives avoiding these doorways, trying to suppress what they feel, trying to escape discomfort. But every emotional pattern within points in the same direction, towards something worth understanding. And if you've made it this far, You're ready to do something most people never do. Instead of running from this door, we're going to enter it. That's where emotional dungeon mapping comes in. It's a 6-stage process for following emotional cues back to their source. So before we continue, make sure you're ready to write all this down. Now, think of one recurring pattern, not your biggest trauma or the hardest thing you've ever experienced, just one problem that's been holding you back recently. Maybe it's a feeling you've been struggling with, or a situation you overreacted to. Whatever comes to mind first, hold on to it, because we're going to map it. So start by naming the pattern you want to explore here. What actually happened? Give it a name like, I lashed out about, I keep feeling, or I can't stand it when, something like this. And then ask, how did your character respond? Avoidance, people pleasing, defensiveness, overthinking? And what makes this pattern feel frustrating, painful, or recurring? Then ask yourself, when does it usually show up? Now remember, you're not solving anything yet. You're simply finding the entrance to the dungeon. Now, at level 2, replay the experience in your mind. Slow it down. What happened right before the reaction appeared? What emotions became active? Fear, shame, anxiety, rejection? And most importantly, what felt threatening about the situation? What were you actually afraid of? Because most emotional reactions start making sense once you identify the threat your mind was trying to protect you from. At level 3, we trace back to the origins of the pattern. When have you felt this way in the past? Can you remember the first time you felt it? What might this pattern have taught you to believe? About yourself, about other people, or about the world? Now, underneath that belief, and really feel into this next question. What need may be going unmet here? Acceptance? Belonging? Safety? Validation, maybe? This is often where the first breakthrough happens, because you stop seeing the pattern as random and start seeing it as an adaptation. Now at level 4, we investigate the code. So during the feeling or situation, what automatic thoughts appeared? What story was your mind telling? Did a cruel inner voice show up? Did a younger, more vulnerable part of you reveal itself? Was there a part trying to avoid discomfort, vulnerability, or responsibility? And notice what roles these parts are playing. Because once the code becomes visible, it becomes much harder for it to control you unconsciously. Level 5 is about rewriting this emotional code. Now ask, what belief has this pattern been reinforcing? What's the story you've been telling yourself? And is that story actually true? Or is it just an interpretation shaped by fear, shame, or past experiences? What evidence contradicts it? And finally, what's a healthier, more grounded interpretation of the story? Reframe it into a more honest, compassionate, and empowering version. Something like, I've made plenty of mistakes, but I can learn healthier ways to respond, grow, and move forward. People will judge me no matter what I do, but shrinking myself to avoid discomfort has already cost me enough. Or it can be something as simple as, I'm allowed to want things. My needs matter. Remember, the goal here isn't positive thinking, it's truthful thinking. A healthier interpretation, a more grounded story, one that gives you more freedom instead of less. And finally, level 6 turns awareness into action. So, what's one small action that would reinforce the healthier version of yourself you're trying to build? One conversation, one boundary, one honest moment, one small act of courage. Then ask, what resistance is likely to appear? What excuse? What fear? Because it will, and when it does, how do you want to respond differently this time? And then What qualities are you trying to strengthen in yourself? Courage, self respect, honesty, compassion, discipline? Because every action becomes a vote for the person you're becoming. And over time, those votes accumulate. A new pattern forms, a new story is written, a new character evolves. And that's what this process is really about. Not fixing yourself and definitely not becoming perfect, but learning how your character works so you can finally participate in its development. And look, you don't need to map your entire psyche tonight. You don't need to solve every problem. You only need one doorway, one trigger, one pattern. Start there. Follow the thread and see where it leads. Because every dungeon begins with a single entrance, a question about who you are, why you did something, or how you feel about it. And every pattern you bring to the light gives you a little more awareness, a little more freedom, a little more choice. For most of your life, your character has been created unconsciously by old stories you never wrote. But now you can see the process. And once you can see it, you can participate in it. The question is no longer, why do I keep becoming the person I don't want to be? The question becomes, who am I choosing to become? And that is a very different game. So you've now uncovered what it takes most people decades to realize. Much of your identity was never consciously chosen. Hidden stories quietly molded you into a version of yourself you never chose. And because those stories were hidden, they felt like reality. But now you've seen behind the curtain. You've seen that beneath every recurring emotional loop, every insecurity, every self sabotaging pattern, there's something worth investigating. A belief, a fear, a need, a story, a piece of your character begging to be understood without judgment. Most people spend years at war with themselves, trying to erase the parts they don't like. The goal was never to become someone else. The goal was to stop living on autopilot, to finally choose the person who was abandoned all this time. You. That choice is where real character development begins. And honestly, knowing yourself isn't really the problem. If we're honest, most people have insights all the time. The challenge is keeping track of those insights so you can actually make lasting improvements in your life. And that's exactly why the Shadowcraft method exists. Shadowcraft is the complete emotional dungeon mapping system. It's like what we covered here, but even more in depth. It's a structured template where you capture patterns, map emotional encounters, uncover hidden beliefs and needs, and consciously create your own character. Now, if that sounds useful, you can find it linked below. But whether you use Shadowcraft or not, remember this. You are not your conditioning. You are not your fear. And you are not the stories you inherited. You're the person deciding what to do with them. And once you realize that, something changes. You're no longer wandering through the dungeon, reacting to every twist and turn. You're holding the map. And for the first time, you get a say in where the journey goes next.